Hey guys, welcome to Art and Soul with Heather. Today I'm going to take you in a little bit of a different direction, and instead of showing you how to paint with acrylics like I normally do, I'm going to show you how to paint with watercolors. However, this watercolor that I'm using is called gouache paint. Gouache is very opaque. It has a look, feel, and texture that's very similar to a soft body acrylic paint. The only difference is the more water you add, the more they look like a traditional watercolor that you would use out of a half pan sheet, like over this example here, which is my half pan of watercolors. And I love watercolors. I think working with them is definitely different. I love the experience, and I love how my art doesn't look the same as every other acrylic paint that I'm doing. Don't get me wrong, I love acrylic paintings. That's why I do so many of them with you. But I like to kind of, steer off the road a little bit from time to time and just keep my experience up with a different type of art media and just kind of have different results, here and there. So like, again, I wanted to show you guys that there's different opportunities out there to get your hands on, to get some experience in. You might like watercolors, gouache paints much better than acrylics, or you might like acrylics more. You just never know the direction you're going to go in. But again, experience is key. But before we get started, I am definitely hungry for a little ministry snack. We have just been kind of going through some stressful times here. And so I just need to kind of remind myself of some, positive thoughts. And of course, for you too out there who might be going through some stressful times, 2021 so far has been a good year, but I think all of us are like, oh, please, please, let's not have a repeat of last year. So today's Bible verse comes from the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 12, and it reads, "Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, and be constant in prayer." My goodness, rejoice in hope. That's good. That's good. Christ gives us hope. He certainly does. He basically just gives us hope that we are going to, if we choose to, give ourselves to him, that we will live with him forever, basically for eternity with him in heaven. And that is definitely a place I have high hopes for, because earth, although it's very beautiful, it can be very stressful and ugly at times. So the fact that he gives us hope to be in a better place with him, and just how he shows us to be, just better all around, that definitely does give me a very good reason to be rejoiceful in that. But to be patient in tribulation, woo, you're talking to the most impatient person here. I am Veruca Salt in disguise. I want everything now. I don't want to wait another minute. I want things done when I snap my fingers. I'm really just awful about that. But patience is key. I really can't explain it too much, because if you're not patient, you're not going to learn essential life lessons. You're not going to better yourself. You're just going to be more upset. The fact that you can't control everything in life. My mom used to always say, good things come to those who wait. And I firmly believe, looking back at it, she probably got that, from, just reflecting back on Christ, because, he wants us to be patient, because a lot of the times good things are at the end of the road, but you have to walk that road first. And sometimes it takes some time to get there. It's kind of like, the golden, the rainbow with the pot of gold at the end, you have to take, anyway, you know where I'm going with that. But be constant in prayer is also key, because you can't be close to Christ if you don't have your Bible open, or you can't just pray once or twice and then be like, well, I prayed, nothing happened. It's a constant thing we have to put ourselves to be willing and wanting to do for him, to have that relationship and connection, so that we can be more patient, so that we can be more rejoiceful in all these avenues of our complicated earthly life. All right, guys, that was a good snack. Let's get painting.
Alrighty, here's my new box of gouache paints by Arteza, and what's nice is that it lists the colors and their codes next to their shades. It also tells you about each color's lightness, transparencies, and pigment numbers. They're still considered student grade paints, but to my understanding, they still have a really good quality to them, so we shall see. And here they are, neatly placed into 10 little fitted trays with 6 tubes per tray. I will say these are a lot of colors, really more than an artist needs, because typically colors are made for mostly mixing primary colors. All these shades are really for a convenience factor, but hey, I'm not complaining because I love paint in lots of colors. So here's what they look like up close to give you an idea how small they are next to my 3/4 ounce tube of golden heavy body acrylic paint. The Arteza tubes are only 12 milliliters or 0.4 fluid ounces, so just under a ½ ounce, but are meant to go a long way, so don't feel you got gypped. Because like my small tube of golden paint, both of them are plenty for starter amounts, but overall, watercolor and or gouache are known as great beginner mediums. Here's the color palette I chose for my owl, and from left to right is scarlet red, burnt umber, black, titanium white, peach, which looks more pink to me, but we'll see. Next is yellow ochre and taupe, or taupe, whichever, tomato. And this one looks like it has more of a gray undertone to it. Now let's see what they look like and if the colors have an exact representation of the shade on the tubes. Well, they certainly have a similarity to a soft body acrylic paint, but so far the colors look like a good match. And here they are, again a nice rich consistency, which is what makes them gouache. Basically, gouache paint is an opaque watercolor media that have more of a matte finish, but obviously the more water you add, the more transparent they become. So these are nice because you can essentially have options here to make your painting. Acrylic paints, on the other hand, are similar to gouache, but once acrylic paint dries, it's set. Whereas gouache paint, you can rework the surface even well after it's dried. In other words, gouache is resoluble, not water resistant, which is due to the different pigments and binders than in acrylic paints. And with gouache paints, you can apply multiple layers with no bleeding that can also be used on many mixed media surfaces. Okay, time to see the colors that I chose tested on paper and how they go from opaque to translucent. The paints definitely go on smoothly, I like that. But notice how the color fades as I add more water with each brush stroke, looking more like traditional watercolors, which are generally more translucent than transparent. As you can see, I got a lot of different shades of colors from one single color, which is nice. I was a bit worried at first because some of the paints looked a different color than what the shade is on the tube. I squeezed more colors off camera. But always remember to wait until the paint dries because paint's colors look different wet and dry. Anyway, for being dry here, I think they look pretty spot on. Okay guys, before we move on with painting, I just had to show you this peach color up close because I still think it looks pink, not peach. Because in my mind, peach has more of like a yellowy, orangey type undertone in it, and I'm just not getting that with this color. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm just the only oddball who doesn't know true colors, but in person, it looks even more pink than what's shown here, almost like a soft bubblegum pink or something. And my lighting isn't giving the color that I'm trying to describe here, or maybe it is, I don't know. But anyway, it's still a very pretty color. I do like it. But my personal opinion is that it's not peach. But you can see a little texture in the paint, which is nice if you like sort of an impasto look. Although this paint, the gouache paint, really isn't ideal for impasto work. Well, I can't paint without paper, so here's what I'm using. Another product by Arteza, which is their watercolor paper for experts. And in case you're wondering, no, Arteza is not sponsoring or endorsing me for anything. You think they would be with all the stuff I'm advertising, but I just bought their products based on reputation by other YouTubers that swear up and down by them. One user said that she liked this paper because she can totally go to town on it and it won't warp on her as she was demonstrating, which is what I need because as you can see here, I've had that problem with some of my work. That basically makes art look worthless and cheap solely because of the paper. And let's face it, guys, our time and effort is not worthless and cheap. So let this sink in that this is what can happen to your precious artwork by using student grade paper like I was using. Anyway, this pad only has 14 sheets that I got on Amazon for about 20 bucks, and I'll include the link in the description for you if you want to get some for yourself. Compared to student grade paper like this by Artist Loft that I've used that has 25 sheets and cost me about 6 bucks from Michael's. That alone should speak volumes of quality differences. And what I've noticed that stands out with this paper is that aside from also being acid-free and cold-pressed, is that it's 100% cotton, mold-made, 140-pound 300 GSM, or grams per square meter. The weight just means how much it weighs per 500 sheets, so you have a better idea about its thickness. And I thought I'd show you here what their paper looks like and its thickness. As you can see, that's a decent thickness for only being 14 sheets. Now, paper with these stats are borderline thick because they are the lowest numbers to categorize a paper like this Arteza watercolor paper as being thick, since there is watercolor paper that's much heavier than 140 pounds or 300 grams per square meter. The bottom line is, Arteza was kind enough to plaster this guarantee label on their paper, which makes me feel pretty warm and fuzzy and confident that I too can go to town on it, and I'll show you hopefully that you can too. Okay, here we go. Notice I taped my 9x12 paper down. It's not only to secure it to my working surface, but it also gives a nice detailed border, and it's supposed to prevent the paper from warping, so we shall see. I'm drawing in soft lines by making an angular line starting from just before the bottom left corner to just under the halfway point of the right edge of the canvas that will be the log. Next, I draw my owl by making a large dome as the head. There's about 1.5 inches or so between the top of the head and the tape, and about 2.5 inches or so of space on the sides. Now I make long semicircle lines for his wings and then sketch in his body. Notice I start his body at the edge line of his head and then taper it in so his head will be a little wider than his body. Here I draw on his face, and notice he has like a Dracula point going on with his eyes about halfway down and his beak that goes to just before the bottom of his face. But take note that the beak begins from the inner corners of his eyes. Now that I'm done, I'm going to draw on my lines a little darker. Since I'm going for more of an opaque look, that will be fine, but generally, if you're going for more of a transparent look, then keep those lines pretty soft, otherwise they'll come through and take away from your painting. Next, I take my 3/4 inch tip flat brush or wash brush, dip it in water, and combine peach, yellow ochre, and taupe, oh my goodness, don't even get me started if I'm going to say this right the whole time or not. But I'm going to use those colors to make my background. And I'll be working from top to bottom, starting with the background first, as you can see, then the foreground. I'm not trying to make an even consistency. I want hints of undertones throughout. When my brush feels like it's running dry, I dip it in more water and continue to go to town. When that's done, I go over it with a little bit of titanium white, and then I fill that corner in on the bottom right. Here I'm filling in the owl using my number 6 flat shader brush with the color titanium white, but notice I keep it pretty thin. I don't want to cover my lines. Now I'm going to start working on the details of his head by using my number 0 round tip brush with the color yellow ochre. I'm just outlining the top portion of his face and then lightly filling it in before I dip my brush into taupe and titanium white, making pinhead dots across the top of his head with the tip of my brush. Be sure to be gentle with your brush, don't smash it in the paper. You want to make teeny tiny dots, plus it's not good to treat your brushes harshly. I go back to darken the top outline of his face with more yellow ochre and outline the top of his head with more titanium white. Using the same brush, I add some more titanium white and fill in his face. Notice I'm painting it in as if I'm drawing in large eyelashes fanning out. I add in a little bit of taupe on top of the titanium white and continue to fill it in the same fashion. I dip my brush in some water to soften it up and blend them in. The taupe should not take over. There should only be a hint of taupe. We want to keep the owl as white as possible. The taupe suggests light shadowing and the direction of his feathers. I add some more titanium white and taupe under his beak again for shadowing and to give a feathery look. Here I dip the tip of my brush into some peach and fill in the tip of his beak. It's very watered down, so his beak should be pretty translucent. It's more of a hint of color. We want to keep a lot of his details on the softer side. Next, I start on his nose area or the top of his beak and gently outline it in using yellow ochre. Notice how thin my lines are, but then I add more titanium white just to soften it up again some. I have to use the blow dryer a couple of times throughout my painting because I don't want too much blending and my color spilling over in areas that I don't want. Therefore, the blow dryer dries it up so I can cover and blend more with ease. Now I add just a wee bit of taupe and then blend that in as well. All this effort is really just trying to achieve a soft feathery look around his beak area, which you don't have to do. I just really like blending and shading. Anyways, you'll see that his head and wings will pretty much have most of the detail. Otherwise, he's a pretty clean and simple barn owl. Here I add more titanium white and taupe, water them down, and fill in the sides of his head. Then I use the color taupe just to make teeny tiny dots with the tip of my brush again to outline the bottom of his face. Notice I don't make all the dots perfectly aligned or even connect all the way. Again, I'm working on hints and suggestions of coloring and outlining. Next, I add a touch of yellow ochre again on the side of his head and soften it up again with some more titanium white. Again, here I am using watered down titanium white and some taupe, filling in the rest of his face in the same fashion, just like I did around his eyes. For his eyes, I first fill them in with burnt umber followed by black, but I leave a thin outline of burnt umber around the eyes. Here I'm using the color taupe, painting in thin semicircles around the bottom portion of his eyes before I use titanium white as the reflection. I also use some yellow ochre at the top. I'll include a close-up of his eyes so you can see better of what I'm talking about since the details are so small. It makes it difficult to see from a distance with my hand in the way trying to show you, but at least you have a better idea of the colors I use and their placement. Onto his body, I go back to my number 6 flat shader brush using titanium white with a little mix of taupe, just doing short downward brush strokes, again to give him a feathery look. Next, I use a little more taupe and make a thick shadowed line under his wing, dry it up a little since I accidentally made it too watered down, and then add another layer again. I do the same thing with his right wing using my number 10 round brush. The tip was amazing to make thin lines, but I found my brush to be too big and stiff for this portion, so I ended up going back to my flat shader brush. For his wing, I combine yellow ochre, titanium white, and burnt umber, and then add a layer of taupe on top. You'll also see I add more of the same colors. You may remember I didn't draw in any outline where to color in the details of his wings. I just drew in his wings. So I'm basically just painting it, trying to get the blending of those colors how I like it, which may look messy or even confusing here at first, but the bottom line is to make your painting to your liking. Remember, you can cover anything up or make tweaks by adding layers with gouache paints. Now I do the same detailing on his wing that I did on his head, just doing several pinhead dots everywhere using my number 0 brush with titanium white, burnt umber, and taupe. Here I just clean up the wing lines a little. Next I use taupe and paint in his leg lines and water it down a little bit to soften it up. I go back to titanium white and paint in a few strokes that would be some small feather type details. Now I'm adding more wing and feather details using yellow ochre, titanium white, taupe, and burnt umber. For the log, I switched back to my number 6 flat shader brush using burnt umber, black, and a little bit of yellow ochre in top, just doing back and forth brush strokes. Using the same brush, I use the edge of my brush to make thin branches using the color taupe. Back to my number 0 round tip brush, I'm using scarlet red to make my winter berries in no particular order, just small random bunches. Here I go back to the color taupe and make some more thin branches and stems to connect some of the berries. I go back to titanium white and add a little bit of highlights to the berries. Next, I switched to my number 6 filbert brush using the color black to create some shadowing under the berry bunches. I I changed brushes again to my number 6 flat shader brush using more burnt umber, black, and a tidbit of taupe to finalize the coloring and details of my log. And if I've been saying taupe wrong this whole time, feel free to help me from embarrassing myself anymore and tell me how to say it correctly the next time. Now for the reveal to see if this expert watercolor paper held up and didn't warp or curl. Darn, guys! That's a bummer and so frustrating because I was under the impression I could seriously go to town on it. Well, time to contact Arteza and kindly tell them about my unfortunate results using their paper. And here's Arteza's response to my claim, having sent in the same pictures you saw, and here's what one of the representatives replied with. Gabby R. says, "Hey there, Heather. Thank you so much for reaching out. I'm so sorry that your paper buckled. I'd be more than happy to refund you for the expert watercolor paper if you reply back with the order number. As far as fixing the paper, what you're able to do is get a lightly damp paper, apply to the backside of your art piece, and add a good weighted book until the next day, and it should be very straight. I hope to hear from you soon. Keep us posted if you have any questions or need any help. We're here 24/7 for all your creative needs. Warm regards, Gabby R., Customer Service from Arteza." So here's the final reveal, and it did end up straightening out quite a bit with Gabby's advice, which makes me feel better. Overall, I still like the paper, only my personal opinion is that this paper isn't really made for full coverage like my painting here, even with the taped border. You may have a different or even better experience in mind, but I wanted you to see it the same time I did. Clearly, Arteza has great customer service, so I'll continue to purchase some of my art supplies with them, like more gouache paints when they run out. So that concludes this painting. And if you liked the tutorial, please be sure to not only share it, but to also hit like and subscribe for more videos. But more importantly, remember to thank God for this opportunity and always paint from the soul.